My name is Michael Mostyn, and I'm the Chief Executive Officer of B'nai Brith Canada, the voice of grassroots Canadian Jewish community since 1875. Today, as we have done each year since 1982, we will be unveiling our annual audit of anti-Semitic incidents, the results of which are based on a combination of police data and calls to our 24/7 anti-hate hotline. The need for this audit, which is the only study of its kind in Canada, has never been greater. Indeed, last year bore witness to the highest level of recorded anti-Semitism in Canadian history, with 1,728 incidents in total. For context, that means an average of 4 to 5 incidents of anti-Semitic harassment, vandalism, or violence occurring every day in our country, a country where we pride ourselves as being one of the most tolerant in the world. I want to extend my special thanks to Mike Cole, MPP for Eglinton Lawrence, Gila Martow, MPP for Thornhill, and Sherry DeNovo, MPP for Parkdale High Park, for joining us today in a show of multi-partisan unity aimed at tackling the scourge of racism and anti-Semitism in Ontario. Similar audit launches are also taking place across Canada in both Montreal and Calgary. But for now, I'd like to welcome Amanda Homan, National Director of B'nai Brith Canada's League for Human Rights, to discuss the 2016 audit numbers in further detail.
Thank you, Michael. And thank you all for being here today. As Michael noted, my name is Amanda Homan, and I'm the National Director of B'nai Brith's League for Human Rights, which is responsible for assembling the annual audit every year. So as Michael mentioned, 2016 was a record-breaking year for anti-Semitism in Canada, with 1,728 recorded incidents. This represents a 26% increase in incidents over 2015 and a 6% increase over the previous high recorded in 2014. Previous spikes in Canadian anti-Semitism, such as the numbers from 2014, have been linked to ongoing and active military conflict in Israel. However, there was no such conflict last year. 2016, as we all know, was a tumultuous year in world politics. And while some have sought to link the recent upswing in global anti-Semitism to November's presidential election in the United States, it's worth noting that the months of September through December actually saw a relative decrease in anti-Semitic incidents in Canada in relation to previous years. Our research shows that it would be a serious mistake to blame politicians south of the border, and that Canadian anti-Semitism is a made in Canada phenomena. As we at B'nai Brith have been noting for some time, there's a demonstrable rise in extreme right-wing rhetoric taking place in our country, and one of the most worrying findings in this year's audit stems from this, namely the rise in Holocaust denial. In 2015, incidents of anti-Semitism related to Holocaust denial made up 5% of overall incidents reported. Last year, that number rose to over 20%. Unfortunately, Holocaust denial is no longer only coming from its traditional home in the extreme right. More and more, Islamist extremists are also co-opting this position and spreading the rhetoric of denial, especially within Arabic language media right here in Canada. And Michael will explain a little bit more about this. Go ahead.
That's correct. One of the most troubling trends of 2016, which stood out in our data, was the prevalence of Holocaust denial and other forms of anti-Semitism within Arabic language media here in Canada. In community publications and television programs, we were repeatedly alerted to troubling examples of the worst, most insidious forms of anti-Semitic messaging. In March, we exposed a newspaper from the Windsor area that encouraged terrorism against Israelis and described it as a sacred duty of jihad. The publisher of that newspaper had recently been hired by the Multicultural Council of Windsor and Essex County to help integrate Syrian refugees newly arrived in Canada. In May, an Arabic language show on Rogers Community Television aired an episode which featured a Palestinian community leader contending that Canadian society should not believe the fairy tales claiming that the Jews suffered oppression, further claiming that the Jewish people perpetrated worse massacres than the Holocaust against the Palestinian people. In July, a newspaper in London, Ontario, published an article which simultaneously denied the scope of the Holocaust while arguing that any slaughter of Jews at the hands of the Nazi regime was fully deserved and justified, given the many societal ills for which Jewish people are allegedly responsible. This paper was promoted as recommended reading for Arab immigrants by the London and Middlesex Local Immigration Partnership. Without the whistleblowers within the Arabic-speaking community who called our anti-hate hotline to tell us about these incidents, we would never have known. These are not extremist publications or jihadist media outlets. These are community publications airing on local cable television and newspapers distributed at grocery stores and coffee shops. However, the fact remains that in each of these incidents, only one person alerted us to the content. One among thousands of readers. And that is what is most troubling to the Jewish community. These people are our friends and neighbors, yet only one person in each case spoke up and spoke out against this kind of hatred and incitement. That is why we are here today, and why we are so grateful to our elected representatives who are here with us. We must all, every one of us, speak out against hate whenever we see it. We must stand together and demand better in a multicultural and multi-faith country such as ours. I'd like to now turn it over to Mike Cole.
Thank you, Michael, and Amanda for the very, very comprehensive report. And to my colleagues, Sherry DeNovo and to Gila Martow for being here in support of this important educational report and warning, I think, that is very, very appropriate. You know, I had spoken to my son, who's the chairman of the TTC, a couple of months ago about incidents on the TTC in Toronto, you know, where 1.25 million people use every day. And the number one harassment or racist problem that they have on the TTC to this day is anti-Semitism. It is still the most common form of racism that occurs on a regular basis on the TTC in Toronto. So that's right here in Toronto. And that is a reflection, I think, of what is happening with the increase that has taken place right across Canada and in Ontario in anti-Semitism. And certainly one of the most frightening aspects of this is the deniers, the Holocaust denials that are taking place and that are becoming almost too mainstream to basically deny that 6 million innocent men, women, and children were systematically massacred by the Nazis, and that despite all the so-called education that exists today, these denials are a daily occurrence. And this is why this report is so critically important, to alert people. The fact is that there are many people out there that not only deny the Holocaust in a casual way, but they do it systematically on the internet. This constant barrage of questioning the Holocaust. And that is obviously directly linked to the predisposition of anti-Semitism, which exists in many of these groups. And that's why we have to be very proactive in trying to confront this systemic denial of the Holocaust, systemic anti-Semitism, which is still, sad to say, right here in our province, our city. And that's why one of the things I would like to mention that I think might help and be an opportunity to break through this wall of denial is the new anti-racism secretariat, which has been established with Bill 114, which is before the House. I hope with this bill we'll be able to break through into our university, into our elementary, high school curriculums, and start teaching and educating our young people about what really happened in the 30s and what is still happening today. So I hope that this anti-racism secretariat that's being established will be able to be very aggressive in ensuring that our young people especially know the facts and are able to essentially weed out the systemic anti-Semitism which exists, whether it be in our educational institutions, whether it be in our media, whether it be in our entertainment media. So that is why I think I have some hope that we'll be able to invest in combating this anti-Semitism, which is the scourge of really of our country, our province. And the last thing I'll say is, we did have some very good dialogue, and sometimes pretty stiff dialogue here. I know I was very proud to co-sponsor Tim Hudak's bill on essentially rooting out the BDS movement, making it illegal to have involvement in the BDS as a company. And then eventually Gila Martow had her resolution that we passed in this House unanimously to essentially condemn the BDS movement, which, as we've said, is essentially a front for anti-Semitism. It's got nothing to do with economics, or it's got nothing to do with the state of Israel. It's got to do with anti-Semitism. And so I'm glad as a legislature we spoke out strongly and condemned it as anti-Semitic and something that should not be tolerated or be allowed in our province. So thank you.
I want to thank my Cole MPP for his kind words. Unfortunately, my anti-BDS resolution did not pass unanimously. There were members of the NDP who voted against it, but it did pass with overwhelming support. And I want to thank Sherry DeNovo, MPP from the NDP, who's here today and is going to say a few words after me. It's no big secret that I am a Zionist and a proud supporter of the Jewish community in Ontario, in Canada, and outspoken, I guess, cheerleader, some people might even say, and I'm proud when people say that to me. I have 4 kids, actually. 2 are in university now and 2 graduated university from Ontario. And I just want to tell a little story about my first child, my eldest child. When he went to university, he said to me, I'm not going to be waving the Israeli flag and being an ambassador like you for Jewish issues. I'm just going to play cool on campus. And I said, fine, you have to live your own life. You're an adult now. And he called me very late at night, it was almost midnight, to tell me that he was sitting in a lounge area watching TV with some friends who were telling jokes, what they thought were jokes. And he was able to ignore them up to a certain point until one of them said, what do you call 1,000 Jews in a Volkswagen? And everybody was quiet because they hadn't heard this one before. And the guy said, an ashtray. Well, at that point, my son said, I don't get it. And the guy says, well, don't you get it? The Holocaust, the crematoriums. Well, at least it wasn't Holocaust denial. So we try to see that at least they knew about the Holocaust and believed the Holocaust. So my son said, well, I still don't see what's funny. And then one of the kids said, oh, my goodness, we forgot he's Jewish. And he said, well, that shouldn't matter. Either it's funny or it's not funny. And they were apologizing and they stayed friendly. But I guess he felt upset enough to go back to his room and actually call me. And I won't say he became a big ambassador on campus, but I know he felt that it was his duty to start educating people and to start standing up a little bit. Our students on campus, sometimes my heart breaks when they let me know the harassment that they're putting up with on the campuses. And it is harassment. It's beyond bullying. And not only are the faculty on many of the campuses not supporting the Jewish students, they're part of the harassment. They're part of the Holocaust denial machine. They're part of the problem. So I really want to appeal to the faculty members who see the bias and are afraid to speak out. You're the adults in the room, and I'm happy to help in any way I can. And I know Mike Cole and Sherry DeNovo as well, to support the overwhelming majority of faculty members in Ontario to support the Jewish students to have a comfortable and openly Jewish experience on our campuses. So I really want to thank the League for Human Rights of B'nai Brith for coming down and for all your fantastic work, Tamara and Michael Mostyn, who are here with us. And I really want to invite people to participate on social media, not just to the sad things like anti-Semitism reports and to talk about Holocaust denials, but the positive things. We're going to be talking later today, and I think it'll be the same three of us speaking on Jewish Heritage Month, which is this month of May. Last week we spoke, we had the flag raising for Yom Ha'atzmaut, which is Israel's Independence Day, and the positive things, because I think too often we're sort of wallowed in the grief, but the Jewish community doesn't. And I think that that's the secret to our survival, is we remember, we commemorate, but we also celebrate. And so I want to, pass the mic on to Sherry DeNovo, but I just want to say that as a representative for the Jewish community and as a politician, I really want to remind people that there are a lot of positive things and a lot of positive people out there, and let's take this opportunity to thank them for all of their great work.
Thanks, Gila. It's an honor to be here. I was very proud to be one of the co-authors of the Jewish Heritage Month bill, which we will be speaking about briefly this afternoon in the House and how important that is. I'm also, though, about to be mother-in-law, this is news, of a Jewish daughter-in-law. My son is marrying. So that will be a celebration. And I grew up in Toronto. I grew up going to Huron Street Public School. And back in those days, all of Spadina was mainly Jewish. We were Jews and Italians at Huron Street Public School. So I can say that both early being surrounded by my Jewish friends, but also being surrounded by the anti-Semitism. For Yad Vashem in the House, I said that the first thing that a Gentile and a Christian has to say is, "I'm sorry," and they have to say it over and over again, because certainly Canada was no beacon of welcoming to Jews. Back in the Second World War, we turned away, of course, a ship carrying Jews. We were complicit. You would have heard anti-Semitism coming out of the mouths of politicians back then, leaders in the community. It was no dirty little secret. It was a very open. My father told me about the boardwalk, no Jews and dogs allowed. I grew up knowing that history, the history of our city, the history of Christie Pitts having race riots, Nazis parading there. This is part of the history of Canada we don't want to talk about. And clearly that undercurrent is still there. And it's not just B'nai Brith that has pointed this out. I want to say Stats Can has pointed to anti-Semitism as the most vociferous of hate crimes, that something up to 8 times as many anti-Semitic incidents as to any other religious or racialized group. So again, this is something we have to note. We have to speak out about it. We have to deny the deniers. And we have to stand together. Certainly in our vision statement, we say very clearly in the NDP that anti-Semitism is a scourge, and we name it as such.
Great. Well, thank you again, everyone. And I guess if there's any questions, I'm sure everybody would be happy to answer them.
Sherry, a question for you. If it is a scourge, how come you had that BDS motion on your conference agenda?
It wasn't on our conference agenda. Any members are able to bring in any petitions, any motions that they want. There was no interest in debating that on the floor. It did not make it to the floor.
But how come it even made it to the conference agenda?
It made it as a petition, but anybody, there are hundreds and hundreds of those, hundreds.
Isn't there some sort of filter?
Yes, there was, and the filter was applied.
I have another question, if it's okay. So just about a week ago, I was talking to a teacher from the Toronto School Board. You talked about anti-Semitism on university campuses, which we're all aware of. This teacher said that it's very prevalent in Toronto schools. And she said she has complained to principals and to the bureaucracy, and nothing is ever done. And, I'm going to be very politically incorrect here, but it's manifested by black population and the Islamic population. First of all, are you aware of it, and how do you deal with that? And by the way, when she complained to the principals, nothing was done.
Do you mind if I? Okay.
You can jump in. Sure.
So from our perspective, we get calls on a weekly basis about anti-Semitism in Toronto area in schools at all levels of education. Unfortunately, it's something that we are working very strongly to combat. We're working with school boards. We're working with individual schools. Unfortunately, though, it's something that is a larger systemic issue. And so unless you tackle the larger systemic causes, it's like playing whack-a-mole. And so for us, unfortunately, absolutely, I agree with you. It's something that we see systemically. It's not something that I think from our statistics anyway, it's manifested in one particular community against the Jewish community. It, I think, comes down to what MPP Cole was saying is education. And I think that's something that's really missing in schools across the province, is proper education about both anti-racism and thus anti-Semitism, but also Holocaust education. And it's something that we're working closely with school boards across the province to institute.
One more question. What do you think about members of the Jewish community who support movements like the BDS movement and the Israeli apartheid movement?
Well, I think regardless of what one's background is, the BDS movement is a racist movement at its core. It's clearly anti-Semitic. It meets the 3D test of Natan Sharansky. It's delegitimizing, and almost to deny the Jewish people their history, and to deny that the modern state of Israel is not just any modern state. It's the return of an indigenous peoples back to their ancestral lands. And in fact, I think unprecedented in world history that indigenous people have come back and regained sovereignty over their indigenous land. That's what's happened, and the BDS movement to its core denies that and creates a false narrative that really Israel was based out of the Holocaust, and that Ashkenazic Jews were interlopers and colonizers. And anyone that understands basic history knows that that's not the case. There's been a steady presence, not just in Israel, but throughout the entire Middle East for millennia.
How does social media figure into the figures? How many, is there a percentage of the numbers that are online?
So if you look in the actual report, I don't have the number of online in front of me, but it does break down into online. The vast majority of online incidents are social media. And unfortunately, it's something that I could just continue to gather data about forever. It's absolutely out of control. In terms of our report, we're very careful to only include things that are clearly and demonstrably Canadian content, so posted by either a Canadian or aimed at a Canadian, or posted to a Canadian site. But that said, I get hundreds and hundreds of reports from social media that never even make it into the audit because they don't meet one of those particular criteria. Social media is by far the biggest source of anti-Semitism in this country, and it's something that because there's very few rules and regulations, so it's very difficult to combat it.
So just to clarify, you mentioned there was one Arabic speaker who brought all of the number of incidents?
For each of the incidents that Michael discussed, there was one.
There were different individuals.
Yes.
So different individuals had whistleblowed and let us know that lived in each of those cities.
Yeah.
Are these publications still around?
Yes.
The Windsor in London?
Some are. London is not.
Well, it has recently.
Again?
Yes,
Okay.
we haven't publicly spoken about this yet.
Okay.
Just recently put out another edition. We were told that he was going to not publish again as part of his.
We were assured, actually.
Yes, but I've been told by somebody in the London community, the Arabic-speaking community, that he has in fact published again. So all of these publications are still around, and it's important to note there was no consequences to these individuals aside from a couple of advertisers pulling their money.
Yes. There were consequences from the advertising front, as Amanda stated, but we had contacted local police forces, and in terms of real consequences, we're still waiting.
Sounds like the
Hate laws are a real problem because, I mean, we've chatted about the imams, the one in Montreal and the one in Toronto, who've preached death to the Jews. And I don't know what the status of those investigations are, but, you know, can something be done to change the hate laws, or?
Well, before we change hate laws, something that B'nai Brith has been speaking about repeatedly is we need to enforce the laws that are on the books. All Canadians need to know that their rights are respected. And in today's modern age, and with social media and the way that, unfortunately, people can be whipped up and radicalized very quickly, I think governments, police need to understand that radicalization can take that fast route. And we need to understand that incitement within society, and particularly within Canadian society, because that's something we can deal with. We can't always deal with what's overseas, but we can deal with what's here in Canada. And we need to make sure that no identifiable group is being incited against, particularly from beyond social media, from publications, from television channels. And unfortunately, what we've documented here in the audit is that was happening in Canada just this past year.
Have police laid any charges in the cases of those two?
There's still an investigation ongoing in those two cases. The only thing I would add to what Michael just said is that, it's beyond social media, and fine, social media is a difficult landscape to police. It's kind of the Wild West in terms of where it falls in terms of the current laws that we have on the books. However, there are very clear laws when it comes to other forms of publication and other forms of hate speech and incitement, and those are just not being enforced.
Would you mind just holding up the audit so we get it in between you two there? Absolutely. So it's visually dependent people.
Sure.
Thank you very much.
Great, thank you.
Were there charges laid in the cases of violence?
In cases of violence, sometimes, not all the time. It's very difficult to, when it comes to hate crimes charges, it's very difficult to make a hate crimes charge stick. So even if there was a charge laid in terms of, say, assault, they might have been charged with a common assault instead of the aggravating factor of hate-motivated crime, because then you have to prove intent. So that's the difficulty.
And incidentally, it's similar when it comes to graffiti-type offenses, that if they're not charged with the hate-related offense, but they're general mischief, there's not proper tracking, so it's very difficult to follow.
What about My Ward News? Were any charges laid in that case?
There's been no charges laid at the moment. There's an ongoing case before the Human Rights Tribunal, but there's no criminal charges at the moment, no.
I want to tell you what some students have told me on campuses, that they say, I don't even wear anything that shows I'm Jewish, I'm not religious, they say they don't even have a name that's identifiably Jewish, and they're walking on the campus, and there'll be students sitting on benches or on a fence, and, they'll be wearing, we call it the kafia, the sort of Arabic scarf just around their neck. And silently, they're not allowed to yell things out because they've gotten in trouble for yelling things, about Israel or the Jewish community or whatever comments. So they don't yell, but they point. And they follow with the finger, the Jewish students walking along the campus paths. How intimidating is that? I'm trying to imagine myself when I'm walking and somebody feels like they're walking right behind me, and I turn right and they turn right, and your heart starts to beat a little bit, and you kind of look behind and go into the nearest store or restaurant or whatever if you realize you're alone somewhere. These are students. These are young people. They're not prepared for this. I don't know that anybody's ever prepared for that kind of harassment, but the campuses accept that that's somehow freedom of expression, to point at a student and follow them along and smirk at them with their finger. And how are you going to charge somebody? What are you going to charge somebody with? You're not allowed to point? So I think that, charging people and investigating people, we really have to get down to the core people, which most people are not anti-Semitic and most people are not Holocaust deniers, and to make them feel comfortable to speak up, because the minority is having free reign. They feel very comfortable. They didn't feel comfortable 30 years ago. People would not have felt comfortable on campuses carrying the signs that they carry now on campuses when I was on university. And I remember that there were posters put up with the Star of David dripping blood and things like that when I was on campus. But the campuses seemed to deal with it, and I felt very comfortable. So I'm really appealing to I'm not going to say there have to be supporters of the Jewish community, and you don't have to be supporters of Israel, but fair-minded, good people in all our communities, and I know it's the vast, vast majority, and they're upset when they hear people talking because they say, I'm not racist and I'm not anti-Semitic, and why are everybody on the campus being labeled? Well, there's a lot of students who feel uncomfortable. There's a lot of people in the Jewish communities who feel threatened, and if the vast majority of people who want to welcome the Jewish community, appreciate the Jewish community, support Israel and all of its innovation and technology, and every time they pick up their smartphone, they remember that maybe there's some Israeli technology in there. The vast majority of people, we need you to stand with us and to work with us and to tell people that's not a joke, that's not funny. So I think on that note,
thank you very much,
Thank you.
everyone.